Welcome once again to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. In a new all-killer, no-filler, streamlined offseason version. I'm your host, Dusty O'Connell, and I'm here with Vikings blogger. You know him from such sites as Vikings Territory, Daily Norseman, Vikings Journal, and this and that other place around the web, Arif Hassan. How you doing, Arif?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing quite well. It's a weird time to be a football fan, of course, because there's not a whole lot happening. But it occurs to me that we haven't checked in with the old Vikings since before the Super Bowl, and there's been a little bit of movement, here and there on kind of the off-season roster move front. Although the Vikings are not really the most interesting team to talk about, just because there haven't been a ton of huge personnel moves. And James brought up during the kind of pre-show conversation, he's like, everyone's saying the right things and everything's kind of going smoothly for Adrian Peterson to come back and wear purple again next season. So that, must mean that he's going to be traded, right?
Yeah, something's about to go wrong. This
is all going way too smoothly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't know. There was a calm before the storm with Percy Harvin, right? So obviously with that datum of 1, I think we can safely conclude that it's pretty much inevitable that Adrian Peterson will be traded, right?
But this is, and even, I can give you some other, totally unrelated data points right? that may or may not be related to that one. But it's just so many teams that are, regarded as bad broadly by the NFL are going through big coaching changes, big quarterback changes, a lot of questions about what's going to happen next season. Whereas meanwhile, a lot of the younger players in the Vikings, a lot of the rookies are getting, top marks from people who look back on the season in review, and a lot of analysts and a lot of people who are, experts at this sort of thing are saying that the Vikings are on an upward trajectory and can even, they're even well positioned in this year's, fair to middling draft. Would you agree with that assessment, or do you think that the hype is overblown and the Minnesota Vikings will stay in the middle of the pack next season?
No, I think it's fair to be optimistic about the Vikings for a lot of reasons. I mean, there's no question that it makes more sense to be optimistic about the quarterback situation than pessimistic. I think the same is true for the coaching situation. I think that you're right that there's sort of a lot of projection going on that we can't verify, right? That we know that Bridgewater is good and that Zimmer is good. I mean, if you take a step back and you take a look at Teddy Bridgewater, you still have to acknowledge that he played well for a rookie. The possibility exists, of course, that he doesn't improve, in which case he is slightly better than Christian Ponder. I mean, I don't think that that's a huge piece of controversy, but I think it's something that we're forgetting. I think that we're just projecting improvement onto him. But for what it's worth, I think all the signs are there for us to think that he will improve. And, it's nice that the Vikings aren't in a quarterback situation where there's a lot of agreement that, the Vikings have to upgrade immediately. So that's nice. And then, also we don't know, right, that Mike Zimmer is a good coach. There's just a lot of indications. And of course, he does all the things that make fans of football happy about a coach. I mean, he's old school in the right ways and not the wrong ways, right? He's not overtly homophobic, right? That's pretty old school, but he's not that. But he is the kind of asshole that's supposed to push a team together. He reminds you of Bud Grant. So all of that stuff that may or may not make him a better coach, he has, right? So that's exciting. But whether or not he's actually a good coach, we don't know. I mean, he improved the Vikings from a 3-13 team to, what were they, 7-9, 6-10?
7-9.
Yeah, 7-9. Oh yeah, because we took bets that they would be 7-9. Perfect.
A whole 7 wins.
Yeah, and so that's great. Leslie Frazier took the team to 12 wins. Not 12, 10.
I continue to contend that Leslie Frazier just happened to be with the team as.
Well, I think that's true too.
That was.
I'm not saying that it's Frazier's unrecognized coaching acumen that brought the Vikings to 10 wins. I'm just saying I mean, there's a lot left to be written of the story of all of the young things for this franchise, but there's no reason to think that we should bet on the probability of things going south instead of north. So, yeah.
Well, and just that sentiment alone, I think, is the strongest argument for why Adrian Peterson will be traded.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Things are just going too smoothly. Well, and especially if Jerick McKinnon comes back, healthy and stays that way through the season. I mean, he was putting together a pretty legitimate season, and I don't know that the Vikings will want to necessarily rely on him from day one next season, but I would be okay with him sticking around and maybe taking the reins if Peterson doesn't work out.
Being like a feature part of the running game, even if he's not the feature part of the running game.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so I think the segues actually pretty nicely into sort of draft talk because this is true of the running back situation. I think it's true of the wide receiver situation. It's true for basically every position where Vikings have questions except for linebacker, which is there's a whole lot that we don't know. And like we don't know sort of what Adrian Peterson's legal situation is going to be. I mean, if he loses, that doesn't mean he's going to be. It just means he has to wait until April 15th to be reinstated. But that is a pretty difficult burden for the team. But if he wins, he's immediately, quote unquote, unsuspended because the NFL can't impose those kinds of conditions and whatnot. I suppose it depends on the nature of how he wins, but I think generally speaking, if he wins, he's back with the team immediately. And so there's that, and then there's also the compounding question of whether or not Adrian Peterson is going to be traded, whether or not he's going to restructure, whether or not he's going to stay with the team. I think that a lot of the Vikings specific media, I think a lot of sports coverage has been a little bit too trusting of the Vikings front office, because they keep on saying, we want Adrian back. It's the same, it's the same sports media that is endlessly cynical about Rick Spielman because they should be, because he's a masterful liar. And, they made fun of, him saying, they had no intent to trade Percy Harvin, and they keep bringing it up. But I think as of late, they haven't really pushed against the narrative that the Vikings are spinning, which is that they want Adrian back. I mean, you've had, I think both Ziggy and Mark Wilf have said it. Kevin Warren, who they just promoted, who was working against Adrian Peterson's reinstatement, he said that they wanted Adrian back. Adrian said that he wanted to come back. Mike Zimmer said it like a month ago that he wanted Adrian. Spielman, in as Spielman-alike manner as he could say, basically said that he wanted Adrian back. I mean, he more said, you'd be crazy as a NFL football team not to want a running back like Adrian, which I guess leaves yourself up to a couple of interpretations. But yeah.
Well, but that's like, I mean, so.
But no, I agree with
the
what
top level people are saying. At the top, we of course we want Adrian back. Like, what's the alternative?
Right.
Do we just let him go? Do we just cut bait with this incredibly valuable asset? No, come on.
Right, and I think that you're right. I think that there's no other set of statements you can make. Like, nah, screw that guy. What? Who is this? Whatever.
Adrian, who? He sucks. We're a Matt Asiata team now. He's the new hotness. Adrian Peterson's old and busted.
The new hotness. And so I think that people have been a little uncritical of it, but it's not like I have sort of the high ground when it comes to media criticism of the Adrian stuff because I haven't pushed back on people saying this either. But I think that it's more likely than people are giving it credit for. It still doesn't make it likely. I mean, some team has to be willing to take on that contract, right?
It's true. He does not come for free.
Yeah, and so I've been pushing that his value is a second and a fourth, or a conditional fourth, or whatever. I mean, I don't really know. It just sounds right. Who knows?
Well, and that would be pretty decent, spots for the Vikings to pick, given that the consensus seems to be that this is not a terribly strong draft, and there's a lot of weakness concentrated at the top. Like there's a lot of, top 20, top 40 players, but, hardly any top 10.
Yeah, I think that seems to be the consensus of the draft. And I think for the Vikings in particular, I think that's an issue because sort of the top 10 or top 15-ish talent are people that the Vikings, frankly, are probably not that interested. I mean, obviously the quarterbacks, right? Both quarterbacks are not really on the Vikings' radar. But then also the type of talent that is probably top 15 You've got some edge rushers, and the Vikings, of course, could use one, but they're not going to pick one early, I don't think. B, a lot of these edge rushers are like these 230, 240-pound guys that don't fit as edge rushers in the Zimmer scheme. Although you always have to be careful because Anthony Barr was sort of projected purely as an edge rusher, and then he's a linebacker, and he's not just a linebacker; he's a very good linebacker for the Vikings. So who knows, right? What the Vikings will do, but I think based off of my intuition about what the Vikings can and should do, and based off the talent available, there's not only very little top 15 talent. The top 15 talent that's there also happens to not be a good fit for the Vikings.
So are you in the plurality of mock drafts that I have seen that say the Vikings should take Devontae Parker with their first pick?
So I am a much bigger fan of the mock drafts that explain the Devontae Parker pick without using any of this teammate stuff, right? Because it actually does not make a ton of sense, right? So
how much of a difference can that possibly make if you played with a guy in high school or even in college? I mean, like you're talking about a game that is just so, schematically different, and you're probably not going to be, asked to do the same things you were asked to do in college, and it depends on where you played and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know.
I think that you're right. I think that there's a good chance that if they drafted Devontae Parker, he would be ready faster to work with Teddy Bridgewater early in the season as a rookie, right? Than an equally talented clone that did not happen to work with Teddy Bridgewater at all in college, which is fine. But I mean, you're not drafting someone for like the first couple of weeks for the rookie year, right? You're not drafting someone to be like the star of training camp. You're drafting someone to work with a quarterback that you think you're going to have for the next 10 years. Chemistry is going to happen if they're good. And so if you draft the most good, you'll have the most chemistry. It's not that complicated. And so I have no issue with the mocks that select Devontae Parker because they think he's the best player that the Vikings could possibly pick there outside of this chemistry thing. But I think that people are definitely overrating it, especially because the Vikings, as soon as they got a new coach, bucked the trend of picking people from the same school in the same draft. Like, it just seems like they've gone in a completely different direction from picking players that players are already familiar with, because I don't know, it's like, I guess it's more of the Zimmer old school thing. Like, it's not my job to make sure you're acclimated to training camp. It's yours. So I'm just going to pick the best players. And then you have to be acclimated to training camp. And then if you do well, we'll play you. And it's like, I don't know if it's refreshing or anything like that. I think it's like nice in a cliche sort of way, but also like it's good to get more talent. Like I agree with that philosophy. And so in that context, I think that it is less likely that the Vikings select Devontae Parker because of this chemistry issue. And, people say, well, it's a good tiebreaker, which I think that's true. I also don't think there are as many ties as people think. And so I don't think you need the tiebreaker.
So are we going to be saying a lot of things this draft season that kind of, just because of the way the draft class is and the way the Vikings' needs are, that go back on the stuff about saying that it's not necessarily valuable to draft the best available player at any given point? Because it seems like that's kind of what the Vikings are going to be stuck doing in the first, right? Unless they, make some sort of crazy pick trade.
It's actually not a bad interpretation, right? Because like there's a lot of, if you've got a lot of holes, you might as well just draft the best available player. But you're right that in a weak draft, so another way to think of a weak draft is that there's a flat talent distribution, right? So there's not too much difference between. So in a strong draft, there's a huge difference between number 10 and number 15, right? In a weak draft, the difference is much smaller between number 10 and number 15. So if you select the best available player in a strong draft, what you're doing is you're selecting a player with potentially loads more talent than someone at a position of need, whereas in a weak draft, it's not as useful to draft someone who does not fit sort of what your need profile is. Because they're not going to see the field anyway. And, I'm a huge advocate of need-based drafting anyway. But I think that in a weak draft, it makes even more sense. I think that's a good point. But yeah, I think the Vikings are in an awkward situation because of the nature of the draft. I think they're in an awkward situation because a lot of their positions are sort of unresolved questions. I already wrote that piece at Vikings Journal about the awkwardness of the wide receiver position. I mean, Greg Jennings is the only one I think that we can fully evaluate in terms of how good he is next year. I think everyone kind of agrees that the receiver play was bad in 2014, but I think it is very difficult to say with any definitude that it will be bad in 2015 just because of how insanely young and inexperienced this receiver core is. And I counted up the number of routes that they've run in their NFL careers. And it's something like 1,800 between the four of them, between Jarius Wright and Cordero Patterson and Charles Johnson and Adam Thielen. And I mean, Greg Jennings has run 4,300 routes in his career. And even young players in the NFL, like A.J. Green, have run over 2,000 routes in their career. But combined, the rest of the Vikings receiver corps has run 1,800 some routes. I mean, there's not a lot of a valuable play in terms of game film that's just out there, right? And so to say definitively that receiver is in need, I think speaks to a level of certainty about those receivers that we don't have the ability to evaluate very well that I don't think is necessarily fair. Because, I was pessimistic about Patterson going into the season. I think people may or may not remember that. And I wasn't quite as pessimistic as he's going to get benched, but I did think he was a little bit overhyped. I didn't see this happening. But I think that in the way that I was pessimistic about Patterson, then I was trying to get people to tone down their optimism for him. I think in this way, I think people need to tone down their pessimism for him this next year, just because, I mean, this dude doesn't just have very little NFL experience. He has very little experience at the receiver position at all. I mean, he comes from a JUCO college. He played 1 year of FBS level receiving football. And I mean, they used him in a way that helps them. Like Tennessee found ways to generate offense with Patterson, but they didn't use him in a way that helped him develop as a receiver, which is fine. That's not their job. But it does give us a little bit of a longer leash when we're talking about ways that Patterson can develop and whether or not he's hit his ceiling already and stuff like that. And I think him and Charles Johnson, who I think there are a lot of problems with, and Jarius Wright, who I like but may be limited by his role, and Adam Thielen, who is the fifth receiver on the roster. I mean, he's very talented for a fifth receiver, but it's not like you can project him to be a starter. I think between all of them, I think there is, between all of them and say a third round or a fourth round pick, maybe a fourth round pick or receiver, if you pick just a prototypical split end type tall receiver in the fourth round who has like a lot of work to do and maybe runs a slower 40 than some of the guys in the first round, between them and the four other receivers, I think there is a greater than 50% chance that you either get a solid to very good starter this year or next year. And so with that in mind, does it really make sense to draft a receiver in the first round? Especially because I don't think receivers generate that many wins based off of their talent distribution. I mean, people talk about running backs like this all the time. Like, a good running back is not going to win you that many more games than a functional running back. And there's, a lot of research and intuition that points in that direction. I can understand that. But I think that's even truer for a receiver because a running back controls a lot of things about what happens once he gets the ball. A receiver does not control a lot of things about how he gets the ball, when he gets the ball, etc. A good running back is going to get 18 carries a game, right? And in those 18 touches, 18 to 25, depending on how good you are and how your offense is run, that many touches a game is going to have an impact greater than any receiver who gets 10 targets a game, 12 targets a game. If you're having a monster game, 15 targets, not even catches, just targets. And so there's that. And then there's also like the fact that two good receivers are better than a great receiver and a mediocre receiver because one's always going to be open. Whereas if the great receiver is blanked, you're done. Right? It's pretty easy to fail in the passing game in that context. And a good quarterback can paper over receivers in a way that a good receiver cannot paper over a bad quarterback. And so there's a lot of reasons I think receivers are not that big of an asset despite the explosion of the passing game. Because part of the explosion of the passing game is that there's more receivers on the field anyway. And so I think that running backs are even more valuable than receivers on a person-to-person sort of talent acquisition strategy basis. And with that in mind, I think that given the murkiness of the Vikings receiver situation in terms of like how good they can be and how good they are, and I think there's only one receiver that's actually like great in this draft. I mean, I like Parker and I like White, but I think Cooper he is fantastic. I think that he's a top 5 kind of guy, and he's being sold as the top 15 kind of guy. I think that's wrong because they talk about his limited athletic upside. That's really only because, I mean, he's going to run a 4.42 or a 4.45 40. That's really fast, right? That's more than fast enough. And he's a 6'1" guy with long arms. That's pretty tall. It's not 6'5". There's like 3 of those in like the first 2 rounds. And so he seems like smaller in comparison, but he's like a tall dude who's fast. He's just not as tall or as fast as some of these athletic specimens this year. When you put him in last year's receiver class, sure, he doesn't go before Watkins or maybe Odell Beckham, but he goes in the first round easily, and he compares athletically better to that class than he does this class. And so I think that outside of Cooper, I think that you've got Parker and White, who are probably the next tier, and then you've got players like Funchess. Depending on how much you care about the height of a receiver, maybe, Philip Dorsett. I mean, there's a couple of players sort of at the top of the second round and the bottom of the first round that I think are not huge drop-offs. And so I think also the amount of receivers in the draft means that there's not as much of a reason to draft them in the first round. The problem is, I think that you could say that about a lot of positions the Vikings need. There's a lot of murkiness. Running back situation, we already talked about how murky it was. Stacked running back class. Probably one of the best running back classes we've seen. You can find not just a competent starter, I think, in the third or even fourth round, but like a good starter in the third or fourth round. So there's not really a reason to draft one in the first round, especially given, sort of the running back situation the Vikings have. You talk about safety. I think that that's more certainly a need, but I think it's being oversold as a need because I think you and I both have talked about how Blanton is a little underrated. Even though I think Pro Football Focus overrates him, I think that he's certainly a starting caliber safety. And I think Andrew Sendejo is even better than Blanton anyway. And I think with that, safety is not as big of a need as people think, although it is a big need. There is a murkiness at the offensive line positions as well, right? I am pretty confident that the Vikings just need to replace Khalil, but the Vikings are probably equally confident that they shouldn't make a move this year to replace him. And I think that's a totally understandable position on their part because he played really, really well for them in his rookie year. And so we know that at the NFL level, he can play well. And I don't think he got exposed. I don't think they found a magical weakness of his that makes him untenable in a sophomore and in the following year. I think that he just needs to find his form, but I just don't know if he can. But I think that creates an era of murkiness too. Like, do the Vikings draft an offensive lineman in the first round? I think they should. I don't think they will. And then they're not the kind of team that drafts guards early. I mean, they draft an interior lineman every single year in the 5th, 6th, or 7th round. And it seems to be how they build the interior of the offensive line, which makes sense. I mean, look at Brandon Fusco, look at John Sullivan. And because of that, I think that if they draft someone high, they're not drafting him to replace Charlie Johnson. They're drafting him to replace Matt Kalil, and they may not do that. And so when you throw out receiver because of the depth and the murkiness, you throw out running back because of the depth and the murkiness, you throw out safety because of the need, and it's honestly a super weak class at safety, and you throw out offensive line because of the way the Vikings are probably thinking about the current state of their offensive line core. I mean, what do you have left? You have linebacker? Maybe, but you don't want to force a pick at one position. It's a tough draft, especially at number 11.
So, fun fact, Rick Spielman has never drafted in the second round.
Oh, as a GM? Yeah.
As a GM. Wow, he's always traded out of it. Do you think that, and historically, we saw this last season, he traded out and traded up to get a second pick at the very end of the first round. Mm-hmm. Do you think this season, you can envision a scenario where he trades down out of the second round to maybe give himself an opportunity to pick up maybe a running back and a linebacker in third and fourth round?
Oh, that's really interesting. I think that's a smart question. I think we kind of just assumed that he's going to trade up into the first. And I think that's not necessarily a fair assumption given the nature of this draft and the nature of what the Vikings need.
It's true. We have a question from a Twitter listener, Steve On Wrestler at Steve Says 3MTA3. He writes us, "It's inevitable the Vikes will trade back into the first. It's Spielman's thing. Is any player worth it?" I mean, I think I don't know how inevitable it is. I think this might be an interesting draft to maybe try and trade down in.
Yeah, I mean, Vikings fans have wanted the Vikings to trade down forever, and to the credit, the Vikings have found ways to trade down. But I mean, everyone wants to trade down in this draft. It's a bad draft for a lot of positions, and it's a good draft at positions where it still makes sense to trade down. Like you don't want to be stuck with, like the 7th pick, and we have the 11th. It's not that different, right? I mean, if you can't grab
7 wouldn't be so bad. We could probably pick up Brandon Scherff.
I don't know. That's true. But again, are the Vikings going to draft an offensive lineman just to play guard in the first? Because
I wish we would.
I mean, would love to pick up Brandon Scherff.
Yeah, and he would be the perfect guy for it. I mean,
yeah, but yeah, I mean, I don't think Cooper's going to be there. I don't think Leonard Williams is going to be there. The Vikings don't need a quarterback, and the edge rushers that are at the top, Randy Gregory, Shane Ray, they're not really good fits for what the Vikings do. And there's a bunch of defensive ends sort of at the top of the second round that are better fits. Who knows? And I think that there's probably going to be an edge rusher who drops that's a good fit for the Vikings as well. It seems like every time Spielman is traded into the first, so every time, it's been for a player who is special in some way or to prevent a drop-off of talent, right? Because and this, I think, is a really smart way to think about it, because the way trades are organized in the draft, you have functionally a fluid equation of value. It's not linear. It's logarithmic. But the point is that it's not like discrete. There's not drop-offs in terms of trade value from pick to pick to pick. But that's not how the talent distribution works in a particular draft. And it seems like when Spielman trades up into the first, say to grab Harrison Smith at pick 29, or to grab Cordero Patterson at pick 29, or to who else did they traded up once more in the from the second, right? Am I missing something? Harrison Smith, Cordero Patterson, whatever.
It wasn't Anthony Barr, was it?
No, it was Teddy. Oh God, I can't believe that. I can't believe it. Or Teddy Bridgewater.
Yeah. No. Why did I think they took Teddy first? Whatever.
More headlines. I don't know. But yeah, I can't believe I forgot that they traded up to get Teddy. Anyway, the
number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings.
In all three of those situations, it was pretty clear. Not only was that there a drop off at that position afterwards, and Patterson may be a bust, but at the time, I think that was sort of the consensus of the draft community too. That Patterson was some sort of special talent. At the time, it was pretty clear that there was a drop off, not just at the position, but in general at the general talent level of the draft from that pick. And so, in all of those times, there was a player who fell further than people thought: Harrison Smith, Cordero Patterson, Teddy Bridgewater, and a clear talent difference between not only the next player at that position. Although I think, obviously, in hindsight, the receiver thing was probably wrong. I mean, there's a bunch of really good receivers. Like Keenan Allen was the guy I was sort of pounding the table for. Or I think Nuke Hopkins even went afterwards. I don't know. But yeah, it was pretty clear that there was some sort of distinction between the value that player was supposedly holding and the value that the rest of the draft had. And I don't know that we'll find ourselves in a situation like that again. And so if that happens, it may be such that the Vikings trade out of the second round again, because second round picks are boring, I guess, and get a couple extra picks in the third, grab a running back, grab a linebacker, grab a guard in the third. That would be a pretty high guard pick for Spielman, right? Maybe, I don't know, grab a safety. You can get a lot of third round picks.
So just for fun, and just to address the second half of Steve's question, I'm going to throw out some names of people in the Draft Tech top 20 rankings in the first round. Sure. And if you think just assuming that they drop to the end of the first round,
29, 30, 31, 32.
Yeah, exactly. You throw out a quick yes or no as to whether or not you think they would be a good pickup for the Vikings.
Abstractly, or like a good pickup to trade up for?
A good pick to trade up for.
Okay.
Because the question is any player worth trading up for into the first round.
Okay. To clarify, I have seen like maybe 12 of the prospects this year in depth, so I'm gonna sort of fly by the seat of my pants on this one. But okay.
Okay. Defensive tackle Danny Shelton.
Man, I think he's supremely talented at nose tackle. I think that in general a team should do that. The Vikings, I don't think so.
Benardrick McKinney, linebacker from Mississippi State.
Honestly, it depends on his combine. If he lives up to his athletic hype, I think so. If not, then he doesn't have. The whole reason he's being considered a first-round pick is because of his upside, not because of how he played for Mississippi State, which isn't to say he played poorly or badly. He just had a lot of stuff to fix that makes him not a first-round linebacker. So I think it depends on his combine. If he lives up to his billing, then yes.
This is pretty unlikely. I don't think he'll make it this far down. But Shaq Thompson, outside linebacker.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Melvin Gordon.
Not for the Vikings.
All right. And I mean, I am skeptical that there will be a whole lot of moving in terms of these guys like slipping down further in the first round.
I wouldn't be surprised if Melvin Gordon dropped. I mean, it's not just that there's a lot of running backs and that running backs have been devalued, but I don't know. There's just been, people are wary of Wisconsin running backs, and there's this meme going around for a while. I don't think it's necessarily true, but I think a lot of people believe it, that Melvin Gordon can't run between the tackles into narrow gaps. He has to run through enormous gaps in order to make plays. And to an extent, having a good offensive line does stunt your development as a running back. But I think a lot of people are wary. I could see him dropping. That's about it.
I thought I was going to mention somebody else, but I guess not. Let's not go crazy.
5 players, that would be insane.
well, no. I mean, let's not just go getting wildly irresponsible just yet. We have a segment for that.
They should definitely trade up into the bottom of the first for Leonard Williams.
Yeah, exactly my. So should we talk combine? That's happening soon. Twitter is blowing up right this minute with the news that Jameis Winston is planning to throw at the combine, and of course Marcus Mariota as well. So popcorn eaters will be filling the stands, hopefully.
Yeah, well, if all goes well, right?
Yeah, right. So you mentioned Benardrick McKinney as somebody whose kind of draft position is dependent on the combine. Are there a lot of players? I mean, given the relative flatness of this draft, are there a lot of players like that? And I guess as a subset of that question, are there very many players who the Vikings' interest in hinges on a combine performance?
I think, so I'll say this. There are a lot of players who can get into the first round, I think, because of the combine. But there are not a lot of players, aside from a player like Benardrick McKinney, who are expected to drop out of the first round with a bad combine. And so you could say first round hopes for the combine exist for a lot of players, right? I mean, I think that makes sense. But I think in terms of like the amount of pressure a player has, or in terms of sort of the expectations that we have for a player, because I can't tell you who's going to unexpectedly jump as a result of the combine. I mean, that's the whole point. They're unexpected. But I can tell you there are people who are living sort of off of their athletic potential more than they are this extraordinary amount of film that they have, right? I think Benardrick McKinney is maybe the best example of that. Sammy Coates is another example of that, but it is like, I can see a world where McKinney doesn't blow up the combine. I cannot see a world where Sammy Coates does not blow up the combine. I mean, he's going to be extraordinary. I don't know. I'm trying to think, because there's a lot of quote unquote potential freaks, right? That may be living off of their athletic potential that require a good combine, not just a combine that meets expectations in a lot of ways. And I'm just trying to think of who outside of McKinney is living almost solely on that, because I don't think Brandon Scherff drops if he has a bad combine, even though he's supposed to be some sort of athletic freak. I think people would just be like, well, maybe his knee is still a thing. We know that he's an athletic freak. I don't think Nick Marshall can get into the first round as a cornerback. with a good combine, even though he's supremely athletically talented, and that's the only reason to be drafted at a quarterback. But he is a guy that's going to live or die by sort of his athletic potential, right? Because he played quarterback at Auburn, but he's entering the draft as a defensive back because he played for 1 year at that position at Georgia before he had to transfer, and he's not a good fit at quarterback because of sort of his tools, and so he's going to need an extraordinary combine for someone to invest in that kind of potential. But I don't think he gets into the first round because of that. Other players, I think Dorial Green-Beckham can drop if he does not prepare adequately for the combine. I think that's not a huge surprise. I mean, he's a really interesting case study in terms of sort of what people value in the NFL. But if he has an average to poor combine, I think he drops entirely out of the first and top of the second. If he has a very, very good combine, he sneaks into the first, maybe even the middle of the first. And I think that's a case where it may go either way. I don't know. I think a dark horse, maybe I mentioned Ronald Darby in my Vikings Journal piece. I think I just mentioned Philip Dorsett. And there's a couple of running backs who've been invited to the combine that could just blow it up by going really quick, but it's very difficult to imagine a running back getting into the first round that's not already in the discussion, again, because of the strength of the class. I think Marcus Peters is going to need a good combine. I don't think he's dependent on it to make it into the first round. But yeah, I think, like McKinney, Alvin Dupree maybe will drop if he doesn't have a good combine, and Dorial Green-Beckham, I think, are probably the best examples of people who will live or die by their combine.
Well, there you go. Are there any players that the Vikings will be particularly watching for their combine performance?
That the Vikings will be watching? I think any edge rushers. I think the Vikings are the kind of team that thinks you can't have too many edge rushers. I think based on how Zimmer talked about the position last year, how he's talked about it during the season, and how he used edge rushers at Cincinnati. They'll always be on the lookout for edge rushers, and there's good, really, really good evidence that the Vikings pay attention to combine numbers for edge rushers. It's all anecdotal, obviously. There's no deductive evidence. It's all very inferential. But if you take a look at Drew Mosk's sort of math rushers formula, there were 17 players that earned a passing grade as edge rushers, not even edge rushers, just pass rushers. So defensive tackle, 3-4 defensive end, 4-3 defensive end, 3-4 outside linebacker. So out of the defensive line positions, basically, only 17 really earned a passing grade in sort of his math rushers formula. And it's designed to be a very, very restrictive formula. 3 of them were acquired by the Vikings. I think that's really strong evidence that the Vikings care about this sort of thing. By the way, there were Anthony Barr, who did not end up becoming an edge rusher, so you could argue that one way or the other. There was Scott Crichton and undrafted free agent Rakeem Cox.
Hashtag math rushers.
Hashtag math rushers.
I guess.
And then, also Jerick McKinnon had one of the best combine performances for a running back in recent history. It's like Jerick McKinnon, Christine Michael, and Jonathan Stewart are probably the only running backs that have ever put together a combine performance that brilliant. But yeah, so when your 3 non-quarterback positions, your first 3 non-quarterback positions are people who are combine superstars, right? And then you look at Brandon Watts. He was also very athletic, put together a very good set of combine numbers. I don't know if he was invited, but his numbers either at his pro day or his combine were very, very good. You take a look at them. I think there's a good chance that the Vikings pay a lot of attention to it. I think at linebacker and defensive end, or edge rusher specifically, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were thinking about running backs and then picked one because they rose a little bit in their estimation as a result of good combine.
So, put another way, the answer to the question, will the Vikings be looking specifically for good combine performances from certain players? The answer is yes.
Yeah, I think pretty definitively they will be.
They and not necessarily from specific players, but rather just for outstanding combine performances.
Yeah, and my intuition, and this isn't a statement that comes with any sources. I haven't had any discussions with people who've had discussions inside the Vikings organization, much less discussions with people inside the Vikings organization themselves. My intuition is that they're really interested in Shaq Thompson from Washington, the linebacker. We just mentioned him as a potential, I would trade up for him kind of guy. And I think, to me, Shaq Thompson has two issues. One, he's light. Like, he's pretty light. Listed, I think, at 228. A lot of people say he's 230. I think people are forgetting that linebackers are just lighter now. I mean, they just are. There's not many 250-pound linebackers left. And because of that, it's less of an issue for me, but it's still like an issue. I mean, he can get swallowed up in the run game. But I think he has the ability to add 10 pounds to his frame without compromising his flexibility or his speed or strength in a big way. And so I think they'll be watching for him specifically, and they'll probably be watching for McKinney. I think linebackers are just going to be super interesting to
them. Shaq Thompson, winner of the 5th annual Paul Hornung Award, given to the nation's most versatile player.
Yeah, he played running back, safety, and linebacker. Also
scored touchdowns in 2 of the 3 positions. Did he score a touchdown as a linebacker?
Yeah.
No.
I don't know.
Yep.
Sure.
2 as running back and 4 on defense.
Whew,
there you go.
Wow. Also, the worst player in baseball.
The worst?
Yeah, actually, he was drafted by the Red Sox because he played baseball in middle school, but he didn't play it in high school. And the Red Sox were like, you know what? 40-round draft, right? It's 40 rounds. In the 40th round, draft me a dude who's willing to come into camp who's just the best athlete in America or whatever.
According to GoHuskies.com, he was drafted in the 18th round of the 2012 draft. So he only went down halfway through that.
Were the Red Sox afraid someone else was going to draft him?
Well, I mean, you don't have to get down to round number 40 before you start, picking guys that are, warming seats.
Okay, fine. But anyway, yeah, they're just like, find me the best athlete you can. And if he wants to play in the minors for us, he'll play in the minors for us. We'll figure it out from there. We'll coach him. So they did. And he went 0 for 39 at bat.
Wow.
Yeah. It's like stunning, right? And then the Monday Morning Quarterback story on this is fantastic. If I remember the story correctly, at the very end of his tenure, because he worked out a deal where he would play football for Washington, and then baseball for the Red Sox minor league organization, sort of in the summers, until he got not terrible, and then they'd sort of make a decision then. But at the very end of his tenure, his first year with whatever minor league team he was with, he hit this super powerful triple or something like that, and he cleared. I don't know. It's like, oh my God, finally all of that potential realized. And then he goes to Washington and he scores a touchdown on his very first game back as a safety. And the Red Sox were like, yeah, we might as well give up on him. He's not coming back.
That is true. The Huskies say very little about his not terribly illustrious baseball career, other than to say that he played for the Sox's rookie-level team in the Gulf Coast League in the summer of 2012.
Yeah, Deadspin called him, before Deadspin knew who he was as a Washington football player. Back in 2012, they were like, oh, we found the worst player in baseball. It was an ancillary story. It was not related to who Shaq Thompson is or his draft or whatever. It was just, this person is clearly the worst player in baseball.
They were just scrolling through some stats one day, and they're like, oh, who's this guy at the bottom? Wow, he's really bad. Turns out it's because he plays football.
You're right.
Well, there you go. So you have been doing, like I briefly alluded to, some pretty significant research on various positions that will be showcased at the Combine. I know you are working on an article or a series of articles about it, and I certainly don't want to spoil your clicks, but what are some preliminary conclusions that you were reaching?
Yeah. So I've been running basically all the Combine numbers for all the basic positions at the draft. And, obviously, that can change, but I've divided up the positions as such. Interior defensive linemen, so that includes all nose tackles, 3-4 defensive ends, and 4-3 defensive tackles. That's one position. And then athletically speaking, and then there's the off-ball linebacker position. So, both kinds of inside linebackers plus 4-3 outside linebackers. Then there's the edge rushers. That's 3-4 outside linebackers and 4-3 defensive ends. And then I just put all the receivers together because receivers, I think, rotate too much for you to say, well, clearly we have a large enough sample size of just slot receivers to say that these are the kind of things that we can figure out about slot receivers. Anyway, I took all of them. I used the Pro Football Reference Career Approximate Value tool, which is one of the greatest tools in the history of football research. And
wait. So how Career Approximate Value tool?
Yeah. So the idea is it finds a way to assign a value every year to every player who played in the NFL, and it uses a formula. Obviously, it's not arbitrarily or subjectively assigned; otherwise, it would not be as great of a tool. But depending on the position, so it has position-specific statistics that are inputs to all of them. Some positions have fewer statistics than others, say guard, right? So it provides those position-specific statistics and inputs them, and then it gives you additional points basically for being in the MVP race, for receiving an All-Pro vote, for receiving Pro Bowl recognition. All of those get you different amounts of points. And then your score is modified based on your team in two ways. The first is if your unit performed well, you get a couple of extra points, right? So if you were a middle linebacker on a defense that was a very good defense, you get a little bit of a boost. If you're on a very bad defense, you get a little bit of a penalty. And then you get a penalty or a bonus based on the number of Pro Bowl or All-Pro players that you played alongside. And so if you were the only All-Pro player on a very good defense, you would have massive points, right? But if you were a player without any Pro Bowls on a defense that had like 4 or 5 Pro Bowlers, and it was an okay defense, you would not receive very many points at all, even if you had sort of the same statistics as that one Pro Bowl player who was a linebacker on a very good defense. And so, obviously it's not perfect, right? But I think in general, if you take a group, and this is the example that they use on the site when they explain it, if you take a group of players who have a 16 approximate value versus 14 approximate value, in a given season, a player who has 14 may have had a better year than a player who has 16. But overall, it's going to be such that the 16 approximate value has much more talent than the 14 approximate value. What's really cool is that there's another way to test the viability of this that other people have done in the past. You can assign the career approximate value, and that's another thing I'll mention in a second, to a draft slot and then regress it against the draft, and it's a perfect logarithmic curve, which I think lends credence to the approximate value approach. That is a perfectly smooth graph by draft position, something that is not dependent on the statistic itself.
So you can go back and look at drafts from previous years, and the draft position will correlate approximately with
really well. Yes.
Oh wow.
Really well. There you go. And given that one is not an input to another, I think that's really cool. And then career approximate value, what it does is it sums up, or it doesn't sum it up. It takes sort of the all of the approximate value for each individual season you've played in, gives you 100% of your credit for your first season, 95 for your second best season. So your best season gets 100%, your second best 95%, 90%, 85%. And that way you reward players who played a long career, but you don't over-reward players who were compilers. So, for example, Emmitt Smith, he was never the best running back in football, right? But he had a very long career, and he accumulated a lot. And so in a raw system, a raw approximate value system where you just sum it up, he would end up higher than people who had better careers than him. But in this system, for the most part, you reward players who had peaks, but you don't reward them too much for having short careers, and you don't reward players too much for having long careers. And so what I did is I took the career approximate value of players drafted between 2005 and 2011, and then divided it by the number of years they had. So it's not approximate value per year; it's career approximate value per year, because you're drafting for their peak. You're not drafting for the troughs.
So average career approximate value.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
And I took every player's approximate value, and I did two things. I regressed every statistic I could find and manipulated it in every way in terms of the combine. So I looked at arm length, hand size. I looked at all of the individual combine tests, including 20-yard split and 10-yard split. So it's 40-yard dash, 20-yard split, 10-yard split, broad jump, vertical jump, 3-cone short shuttle, and bench press reps. So I took all of those. There are interesting ways to combine them based off of how certain evaluations. So I created different combinations of those. I divided each one of them by density, by weight, by height. I manipulated them in a bunch of different ways to see if certain configurations of these statistics are predictive. And I did that for each position. And so I did it two ways. The first is I regressed those values against the career approximate value of those players, period. That's it. Like the per year, so average career approximate value. I regressed it against that. And then I regressed it against the difference between a player's performance and their expected performance based off of the draft slot to see if certain positions had certain workouts that were under or overvalued by the NFL.
Looking for bigger or smaller kind of gaps in the trend, right?
Yeah, like basically inefficiencies in terms of the way that the NFL evaluates the combine. So looked at it from 2005 to 2011 for every position. I'm not done yet. I haven't finished cornerbacks or safeties or tight ends, but I've got most of it done. And I'm not looking at kickers, punters, or quarterbacks. So
why not?
I don't think it's intuitive that the combine predicts their ability very well, and I don't think you can use draft value as a way to control for your research in any way, because very few kickers and punters get drafted or invited to the combine, and too many quarterbacks get drafted early for you to use approximate value as a way to control for their draft position. And I don't think the combine intuitively predicts quarterback performance either, as a matter of fact. So
that's true, and they're like, not every quarterback prospect throws at the combine and blah blah blah. Yeah. So you can't really compare two players from the same year in the combine if one threw and one didn't. No.
Yeah.
So again, without spoiling your article, what have you been able to draw any useful conclusions from this comparison?
Yeah, I think I've done it for sort of each position. So first, one thing I want to get out of the way. So Justice's math rushers thing is elegant. It's really good. Holy
hashtag math rushers.
Yeah, hashtag math rushers. It's really good. Like, I make fun of him all the time for it. It's very good. And he approached it in a different way than I did. He worked backwards and I'm working forwards, and neither is superior, but I was able to test because, I don't have his equation, but I've got rough versions of his equations based off of what he's posted and who has succeeded and who hasn't. And after hours of work for each position, actually days of work for each position, I didn't produce something that was significantly better. It's a little better because I get access to his work and then I can improve on it. But first, it's very good stuff. Second, you'd be surprised at some of the stuff that's predictive in the combine. And I made sure to run significance tests too. It's not like I just, if something has a correlation, fantastic.
Any old outlier will do.
Yeah.
Not that.
Yeah. And so, for example, running backs. People tend to talk about the short shuttle as a decent running back drill.
Well, you would think that it incorporates a lot of the kind of motions and situations that running backs would frequently find themselves in, explosiveness and, short runs, stopping quick and, throwing blocks or angle changes, that sort of thing, right?
Yes, I think it is very intuitive to think that the short shuttle is predictive of running back performance. It also is not predictive of running back performance in the slightest. I mean, one of the ways that I would evaluate the usefulness of a statistic. So there were 4 basic approaches I took to each combine workout, plus all of the additional approaches based off of how evaluators traditionally combine workouts. And so the first is to look at the raw score, right? So you ran the 40-yard dash in this many seconds. Does the number of seconds you run the 40-yard dash correlate with whatever? So that's one. And then you can have a weight-adjusted score. So for each position, I created a regression formula for what your expected 40-yard dash is based off of your weight and your height. And if you exceed that, you get this many points. The amount by which you exceed or do not exceed that is another basic input to a formula, right? So you can do that. And then there's instead of doing it linearly, is every microsecond or every tenth of a second better than the next tenth of a second? You can just take a look at basically yes or no, right? If you run the 40-yard dash faster than 4.5 seconds, is it better than those who run the 40-yard dash slower than 4.5? Are those two groups different in a way that's worth putting into a formula and predicting for it? And I did that for both weight-adjusted combine scores and non-weight-adjusted combine scores. And so there's 4 basic ways to look at it. 2 of them are linear, 2 of them are not, right? And in doing so, there's not a single way I could look at the short shuttle and find any predictiveness at all for the running back position, which is just interesting. But, I mean, the running back is the only position where literally every other workout has some bearing on how well you do. It's the easiest position to predict by their combine performances. And we had a bit of a preview with that when we were reading Bill Barnwell's work a year or 2 ago on Bill Barnwell's speed score. It's in fact just called Barnwell's speed score, where he takes the 40-yard dash and weight and creates a score based off of, weight times 200 over 40-yard dash to the 4th. That's his equation. It's insanely predictive for a very simple equation for it's football, right? It's a very complex sport. And I think we can all agree that there's primacy in film study and that it is better than other things with a talented eye for evaluation. But in this case, it's very predictable. It turns out that was one of the inputs I used because, he did work. It's free. I'll use it. But everything else can provide inputs for running back. So how well you run the 3-cone as a running back, that helps you. How well you bench press, it doesn't help you very much, but it helps you. The difference between 10 and 20 bench reps for a running back, not very much, but it is predictive and it is significant at the P equals 0.05 level. So it helps, just not much. Your vertical leap helps. Your broad jump helps. Your broad jump much more than your vertical leap, actually. Your 10-yard split helps, your 20-yard split helps, and your 40-yard split helps, all by different amounts. More than... So here's the thing, right? If you know someone's 40-yard dash, you can reasonably guess what their 10-yard split and 20-yard split are, right? More than that, it still helps. So even accounting for the fact that the 40-yard dash gives you information about the 20-yard split and the 10-yard split, all 3 of those numbers help. So that's interesting. I think running backs are probably the easiest to separate athletically, which is not to say that there aren't outliers, right? So, for example, the single best running back sort of in this group based off of the equations that it created, athletically speaking, is Niall Davis, who may or may not turn out to be great. He's stuck behind Jamal Charles. It's not really an indictment on him. But the second one is Ben Tate. And I think we all kind of know what happened to him. But I think if it weren't for injury, he was astounding before his injury for the Houston Texans. You could argue he was better than Arian Foster, and then the injury kind of took it out. And then after him is Chris Henry and Darren McFadden. That's not a very stellar top 4. But if you account for draft position, and take a look at what is traditionally overvalued or undervalued. Javid Best, whose career ended because of concussion, he was actually very talented when he was in the NFL, ends up with one of the top scores. But then you've got a run of people like Jamal Charles, Maurice Jones-Drew, Ray Rice, Ryan Matthews, Marshawn Lynch, Bernard Pierce. They're all at the top of the list of people who will overperform their draft value based off of what their combine is. So it's pretty cool that it does a pretty decent job of predicting people. There's one outlier that I don't know how to control for. It's Dree Archer. The formula just doesn't know what to do with running backs that weigh less than 180 pounds. So just have to throw that flag out there, I guess. But yeah, there's that. Edge rushers are probably the next easiest to predict based off of their scores. And for them, their broad jump is important. Their vertical is important. Their height and weight are important, and their 3-cone is important. And that's mostly it. Wide receiver. This is interesting. I don't think people expect this. What do you think is sort of the most important workout for the wide receiver to excel in order for them to do well at the NFL level?
I'm going to say 3-cone.
Yeah, that's outside the box. And let me take a look. The 3-cone is definitely not insignificant. It is definitely part of the equation in terms of predicting how well a wide receiver will do. And I think people were surprised by that when I mentioned it briefly on Twitter. But the single most important workout is actually the 20-yard split. It's not the 10-yard split or the 40-yard dash. It's the 20-yard split. It tells you a lot of information about a receiver. Then after that, it's short shuttle. And after that, it's generic explosiveness as measured by your broad jump and your vertical. And then it's your 3-cone, which, again, significant but not hugely. And then your 40-yard dash. One interesting thing I found out, though, is by itself, the 10-yard split is a pretty decent predictor for receiver performance. Like, it does well. The reason I can't include it in the equation is because we're including information about your 20-yard split, your 40-yard split, and your vertical leap and broad jump, all of which correlate to a good 10-yard split, enough that it's already accounted for when you include all of those things. I just find that interesting.
Huh. Yeah. That is interesting.
So if you wanted one number that tells you the most about a receiver, I think the 20-yard split is probably that number. And then after that, you could take a look at their 10-yard split, and I think that would give you a pretty decent understanding, especially if you don't have access to their vertical jump or broad jump scores. But for the most part, more precision can be had by including other measures of explosiveness.
Huh. Well, there you go. And that, follows reasonably.
Yeah, and I do want to go out of my way to say it's as predictive as you are willing to let it be, because, again, nothing correlates better to how a player does in the NFL than where they're drafted. And a lot of where they're drafted is based off of subjective evaluation from talented evaluators. And so this only provides us with more information. It does not provide us with definitive information, which I think you and I both know is just true. But I think it needs to be stressed, especially for people who are listening to the podcast maybe for one of the first times, or are not familiar with the way I approach things. I'm a huge stat head, but I will say, obviously, your draft position is a much better predictor of how you do. These are just ways to gain small efficiencies in the process. Incidentally, taking a look at wide receivers, the best performer I have that competed in all of the workouts that they need to compete in order to qualify. So, for example, Calvin Johnson did not do all the workouts, so I could not include his numbers in the final analysis. But the best one is Julio Jones. And I think a lot of people would intuitively think, yes, the way he is athletic and the way he is athletic is very good for a receiver. So, yeah, there's that. Oh, and there's also a draft Twitter darling, Jeff Janis, who's currently with the Packers.
Huh.
Yep.
Yeah, no, it's kind of the same reason why we, go to all the trouble of concocting such, nonsense, well, not nonsense, but such complicated derived statistics in baseball that, try to account for park effects on both offense and defense for every single MLB park. It's because, the numbers that the average fan could use or would use to, kind of get a sense of the game just by watching the television, maybe don't tell the whole story. And there are other ways to look at that information to tell you, whether you're looking at something useful or, like, for example, with, explosiveness or split times with wide receivers, or whether you're looking at something that it seems intuitively useful, but is actually not very useful, such as shuttle times for running backs.
Right, exactly. And, for the most part, and I think this actually holds, true for baseball too, for the most part, most of the statistics that you have tell you some form of the story, right? It's like on-base percentage, pretty good for hitters, right? Quite good for hitters. But I mean, you can always get a little bit more precise. You can adjust it for eras, so you can start comparing it across eras. You can, adjust it for park effects, and stuff like that. You could maybe adjust the importance of slugging relative to getting on base, for OPS. All that, right? You can get more precise, and it'll tell you more information. But a lot of the general understanding is a decent guide. Like, a receiver runs a 40-yard dash that's fast. That's a good thing, right? You don't want to stress it too much, but I mean, it's a good thing. The one thing that does annoy me about the combine is not how much emphasis people put on it. It's on how much emphasis people put on not putting an emphasis on it. You know what I
mean? Making sure that we all talk about how we're not going to talk about something?
Yeah, basically. They're all just like, well, everyone knows the combine's overrated. Well, if that's true, A, why are we spending so much money on it? B...
Exactly. Now for our 48-hour wall-to-wall nonstop combine coverage.
Right.
Like...
and then B, like, how do you know that it is? Like, how do you know that it doesn't help people make decisions?
Show your work. Yeah. Don't just, like, it's easy to go around and be like a critic and say, everything is overrated. Music critics have been doing it for years.
Make a lot of money doing it for years.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there's room for that if it's a purely subjective pursuit. But the nice thing about, sports is that they give us these, great big catalogs of numbers to work with. And it's cool that we can, go look back and be like, well, hey, wait a minute. Not only is, not all of this data irrelevant, but this is actually a semi-objective study of it. And furthermore, we found that, a player's career value correlates very strongly with where they're drafted. And even furthermore, we have found ways to determine what the most indicative scores of a player's eventual talent will be at a combine. And I mean, we're not talking like, this player is obviously going to be a smash and you can't use these statistics to make a bad player in a bad draft any better, but it's still interesting.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think, it can do more than break ties, right? And I think that's a pretty good litmus test for how useful new information is, right? Because if you have some information and it can break a tie, that's good to have. But I mean, there's a bunch of things that can break ties. If you have two players equally graded, if you're using a tiebreaker, I mean, you're making a 51-49 bet, basically, right? And that's fine. It's good to have, but there are ways to get more information that can move a player up or down a board by an entire tier. And that's super useful, I think, for NFL teams. And I think it's super useful for fans in terms of, like, interpreting sort of what the results that we're getting are. What I find really fascinating about this study is how flawed my inputs were to start with, and how well they correlate despite that. Everything is hand timed. I didn't use any of the electronic timing for the combine. First, because I would have a mix of information. I would have a mix of electronically timed and hand-timed information. I don't want that. Second, hand-timed information for the combine actually tends to be much more consistent than the electronic timed information because it's still hand-started, but they wanted to standardize the way that you start the timer. And so unusual stances are penalized, and often you will see a player run faster than another player but end up with a slower time somehow, even when you superimpose their track on each other because of the way they do the start time. So instead, I chose the more consistent, if still flawed, method of timing players. So all of the times are hand-timed, right? And I didn't adjust career approximate value for, A, how bad the Pro Bowl is at selecting players sometimes. Like, it is pretty bad at it. B, it doesn't account for injury at all, which I think should not penalize a combine score in terms of how it relates, right? Like, so, for example, one of the players that I mentioned, Javid Best, has a very good combine-specific score for running backs. Very good. I don't think that's a bust for the metric because I don't think he played poorly as a result of what he did on the field. He just left because of concussions, right? And so it doesn't account for injury. It doesn't account for, how bad the Pro Bowl can be. It's some of the inputs to approximate value. And it doesn't account for, a couple of other things like the depth chart. Like if you happen to land on a talented roster at your position, your approximate value is just not going to be as good. It doesn't account for how bad the rest of your team is going to be. That might bring down your approximate value by maybe a little bit too much according to the approximate value formula. And approximate value is a very rough, crude tool as it is. And when you reduce your sample size from 15,000, which approximate value is obviously very good for, to 200, where it can be a little bit noisier, to have like the R squared correlation I had on each of these positions was at least 0.2, which means the R was pretty high at times, right? Which for statistics people, I think it means a lot. But I think if you're not a statistics person, all I'm really trying to get across is if you can explain 20% of how well a player does in the NFL based off of how athletic they are according to flawed combine numbers, without accounting for injury and without accounting for their depth chart or the rest of their team, I think you've done a really good job. And I think
that's pretty significant.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty cool. And I made sure to make sure that we pass significance tests too. So that's cool. I'm super excited about this.
That is cool. Your full write-up will be on Vikings territory, I imagine?
Just going to be a bunch of places where I'm going to do write-ups that explain what I'm doing. So I think that when it's all said and done, I think that the majority of my work will be on Vikings territory, but all of the sort of the products of the work, if you will. So I'm going to I'm going to identify winners and losers from the combine. I'm going to identify people that are underrated on the combine. I'm going to identify the best pure athletes at the combine, regardless of how much it impacts their position, right? Like, so for example, if a running back runs a really good short shuttle at 260 pounds, maybe that doesn't make him a better running back, but that's super interesting trivia. Is he the best athlete at the combine? Well, let's find out. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm also going to do a list of sort of the best combine performances ever. And that's going to be in a bunch of places. I'm going to put them in the Sporting News. I'm going to put them in Optimum Scouting. I'm going to mention players the Vikings should identify at the Bleacher Report. But a lot of the work is probably going to end up being at Vikings territory.
So check out VikingsTerritory.com for Arif showing his work and explaining in more detail the process. And then I guess just be aware of the sports blogosphere in general if you are interested in reading more about the results.
Yeah. Basically follow me on Twitter.
And that just, goes as a rule. I mean, that's really the best way to it's maybe not quite the fire hose. I know that's what Twitter calls its entire feed is the fire hose, but for the greatest frequency of off the cuff updates, there is no substitute for Twitter, especially when you're talking about Arif. In fact, we rely on Twitter for our mailbag. Should we answer a couple of questions?
Yeah, I think it's time.
Got a few. Matt Frazier at Frazier Matt D writes us, who do you compare DGB to? And do you believe rumors that he's changed work ethic and personality? So
I haven't watched a ton of him, but I've watched enough that I think I can make at least a soft comparison. So DGB, otherwise known as Dorial Green Beckham, just to explain to people who may not be familiar with him. So he was the top prospect coming out of high school. He's a 5-star recruit, the 6'5", 6'6" receiver, 230 pounds as an 18-year-old, right? Recruited by every school, chose to stay at home at Missouri. Huge win from Missouri. Flashed a lot his freshman year. Had constant problems off the field. And so, there was a marijuana arrest here and there. He actually got arrested, I think, twice for marijuana, but the second time he was arrested for not just possession, but intent to distribute. So he had over a pound on him.
Homeboy looks like a taller Randy Moss. His arms are so long.
Okay, so actually, that's perfect because that's the comparison he is most often received.
And you don't agree?
Well, yeah, I'll talk about that in a bit. I'm going to go a little bit more into the background of DJB because there's one big thing. Okay. Yeah, and so, well, the marijuana thing, that's a pretty good comparison to Randy Moss too, I guess. But there's other things that you have to worry about. There are maturity problems in terms of his work ethic and on the field, on the practice, on the practice field type stuff. He's been late to meetings. He's even missed a meeting or two, which for NFL coaches, that's like a cardinal sin, right? And there's problems about, his intent or ability to improve based off of his work ethic, those issues. But the biggest issue is actually, and I guess the story has gotten more precise since I first heard it. I first heard that he threw his girlfriend down the stairs, which is bad. There's no way around that. But I guess the story as it's evolved has been not his girlfriend, but someone else at his girlfriend's apartment. But he threatened her anyway, so it's not like he's pristine about that. And the someone else at his girlfriend's apartment was not an intruder, it was a friend.
Well, that's totally fine then.
Right. Yeah.
I guess.
But yeah, I mean, and I guess she could have pressed charges against him anyway, and then chose not to. There's a lot of red flags there, and it's not any of the individual incidents; it's the combination of those incidents that probably take him out of the first round.
The phrase "ongoing character questions" seems to be
that's sort of the thing. Obviously, like Matt alludes to, there are rumors that he's changed his work ethic and personality. For some players, I believe that, and for some players, I don't believe that, and I don't have a lot of basis to make that determination with any degree of certainty. I just happen to, and so huge grains of boulders of salt when I answer these questions. I thought, for example, Derek Rogers, who was coming out of, I think it was Tennessee State, had changed his personality, and I believed those rumors. Even though I hadn't interviewed him, I don't know anything about the guy. I haven't interviewed him. I hadn't even seen many interviews with him. People I trust did say there's a good chance. Whatever. I don't believe DJB has, and I can't tell you why I think that. I don't think that he has, because of maybe the nature of those problems, or the multitude of those problems, or that those problems have continued to dog him. So, for example, when he was kicked off of the Missouri team, went to the Oklahoma team, the issues about his work ethic followed him, and that Oklahoma people were very, very annoyed with his work ethic there. And so I think maybe that's a reason to be a little bit more wary than most people who are rumored to have changed their personality. And you have to take it with, a little bit of hesitation and skepticism, because everybody who had off-field concerns magically changes them before they're all new people right before the draft, right? And and you have to be careful about it. The comparison to Randy Moss is the most frequent one, and it's not because of the off-field stuff. Although, I mean, the marijuana thing, that's a pretty good fit.
But there's a picture of him catching a ball at Mizzou where the ball is like basically at knee level, and the guy's barely bent over.
Yeah, no, it's extraordinary. He has fantastic arms, and the
aforementioned freaks we were talking about.
Yeah. And the thing about it is he's barely bending over to grab the ball that's being thrown at his knees. He has a long torso. He gets a long way down.
It's true. This guy, you're saying this guy's like 6'6". I mean, this is no joke. He has a very large window.
And he's got a fantastic vertical leap. He's got pretty good hands. But there's the thing. So he's been compared to Randy Moss. He's also been compared to AJ Green. For me, I think the comparison is Justin Hunter, who has actually also been compared to Randy Moss. Justin Hunter out of Tennessee. To me, and it's not off-field stuff, although Justin Hunter, I think, had maturity concerns coming. I don't know. I don't really care. Justin Hunter had a bad case of the drops. He hasn't fixed it yet. He came out in the same draft as Cordero Patterson. So if I'm giving Patterson a chance to improve, I should theoretically give Justin Hunter a chance to improve.
That would only be fair.
Yeah, and I mean they were teammates too. So maybe being bad at good things is
it's something they coach.
Team quality. But yeah, and so Hunter was supposed to turn all of this athleticism and fluidity and relative on-field intelligence and flashes of technique into this Randy Moss package. And I think Dorial Green Beckham is a story that's made better by the argument that he would be the best receiver if it wasn't for the off-field stuff. It's just more interesting to say that. It's more interesting to think that. It's more interesting to talk about it. And it's made even more interesting by the fact that there's an argument for it anyway. But I don't think it is obvious. I don't think it's clear. I think he has a lot of technical issues. I think that he's a rough route runner. I think that he doesn't have phenomenal hands. I mean, he makes these extraordinary catches. You're talking about sort of one of the stills of one of those catches right now. But he makes like routine drops. And I think he's not a reliable receiver for only talking about his ability to be reliable on the field. And I think that if he came out without the off-field controls, he certainly would be a first-round pick. I don't think he'd be the kind of lock that people are talking him up to be a top 5 or top 10 pick. I think that there's a lot of stuff in his game that he needs to clean up. He's a year removed from football. We have no evidence that he's cleaned up his game. We have no evidence that he can improve. With Cordero Patterson, we had a lot of evidence that he could improve before the draft. I mean, the player that he was at JUCO was not as good as a receiver as the player he was at the beginning of his career, his 1 year at Tennessee. And that player was not as good as a receiver in terms of those skills as the player he was at the end of that year, of his senior year at Tennessee. There's improvement. We don't really have that track record for DJB. We just don't. And he's a year removed from football anyway, which isn't to say he won't blow up the combine and he's not fit or he's, whatever. But I think that you're banking on improvement that, NFL decision makers routinely bank on it, right? That's fine. But you're projecting improvement that he hasn't shown an ability to do so far. One of my favorite things about a draft prospect is if they've shown improvement over the course of their college career. They don't have to. For Golden Tate didn't, right? And he turned out to be a pretty good receiver, right? They don't have to. But it's very nice, especially if they're an upside kind of player, if they do that, and I don't think he did that. So to me, he's more Justin Hunter than Randy Moss.
To the off-field concerns, I think that just speaking about people in general, it's very difficult for anyone to actually change their personality.
Yeah, I think maybe abstractly you can say, I did say this about Johnny Manziel, so whoops, wrong there. But I think abstractly it's easy to say a 23-year-old who's what you're going to end up with on the team is not the same as an 18-year-old. A person who has a college transgression by being a college person is not necessarily indicative abstractly of how they're going to be at 23, 24. I think maybe in the NFL it is a little bit different, and I don't want to go all anonymous scout, general manager cliche, old dudes making judgmental faces at young dudes for liking hip hop. I don't want to go in that direction, but I think it is an insular bubble. Yeah, I think people tend to surround themselves with people who enable their behavior in the NFL, whether it be other players or friends they magically gained during the pre-draft process, relatives they just happen to find, and people who enable that kind of behavior. And I think that giving someone who is routinely immature millions of dollars, I think that worsens the situation. And man, I hate saying that because it sounds so cliche and judgmental, and I love giving players the benefit of the doubt for this sort of thing. I'm really sympathetic to like these off-field sort of. For example, Marquess Wilson was kicked off of the Washington State team 2 years ago, and he was one of my favorite receivers in the draft. And I heard about all this off-field stuff, and I gave him the benefit of the doubt, and I think I ended up being right because it's not easy to get along with Mike Leach. But I think that I'm very sympathetic to players in general. I think I need to be a little bit less sympathetic in terms of how it projects into the NFL draft and the NFL. And you need to be a little bit more discerning about the nature of those players. I should have been a little bit more harsh about Johnny Manziel. Even if he does turn it around because of rehab, I think that the initial take that he's too immature for the NFL is probably correct, no matter what happens from here on out. And I think that going to the NFL does not make it easy for someone to kick the habits that they established as a 20-year-old, even if it is maybe unfair to judge someone's adult life based on what they did at 20.
No, I think you're right. And I get what you're saying about the kind of two different situations, but I think DGB's situation is maybe a little bit more indicative of some deeper character issues. And this is what I mean when I say you can't really change your personality. He can go out there and he can, work hard and, reap the benefits of, a change in work ethic. And he can still be, this kind of, trash talking party monster or, have the same healthy disrespect for authority that a lot of people do and, still get it done on the field. But it seems like he's had a couple of opportunities to do that in college, and neither time did he really, change his stripes. Like he's had an awful lot of opportunities and has, gotten pretty far with a lot of his physical gifts. But like you say, work ethic issues, technical issues, he seems a lot more like Justin Tucker than or Justin Hunter than Randy Moss. Like, it's just the confluence of all these things makes me think that he is, and of course you never want to use the phrase lost cause on somebody who's like 23.
Right, exactly. That's why I'm always hesitant. But yeah.
Exactly. But conversely, this guy does not have very many of the markers for turnaround success either.
Yeah, I think that there's very few, quote unquote, leading indicators, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think you're right that it has probably not made him undraftable, but has damaged his draft stock. And yeah, that's about all there is to that. Chris Gaddy at Gatino Heat on Twitter writes us, what are the chances Fitz ends up in Minnesota?
I think pretty low. Unless you mean like in the state, in which case 100%. But he still lives here, right? I think he still lives in Minnesota. Which, I mean, what a cool story it would be if he was a Viking. I mean, yeah, he's super expensive and he's really old, and what a cool story. It's like Torrey Hunter times like 300, except probably more helpful than Torrey Hunter.
The Torrey Hunter thing is not good.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what I mean.
That's a really, really, really not good.
But I mean, it's a good story until he starts playing.
Is it though? Is it a good story? It just, I don't know.
Well, okay, so
I don't know, man.
Fitz, I don't think has ever spoken
But think
out
about how
games.
damaging that is to the whole like narrative that we're trying to build, and that finally the national media is starting to get on board with. Like, oh, thanks for everything, but go sit on the bench. We're gonna wheel this dude into.
That's true.
I don't know.
So it's
I don't
a
like it.
significantly better story than Torrey Hunter. What if it was? I don't know much about baseball, but what if it was Tomei?
I like Tomei better because, I mean, ideally I would take neither. I would rather spend that money on
Denard Span. He's still not on the team, right?
I would much rather have Denard Span.
Okay, so what if the story is Denard Span, but he's like 33?
Oh no, dude! Okay, well, Torrey Hunter is like 40.
Yeah, that's why I backpedaled from the Torrey Hunter. Yeah.
It's. I mean, there's nothing worse than the Torrey Hunter thing. It's. It's really bad. It's like the WWE bringing back Ric Flair. That is what it's like.
Let's go to the new comparison then. What if it's 33-year-old Denard Span?
That would be great because 33-year-old Denard Span is a better hitter and fielder than 40-year-old Torrey Hunter, and it's not even close.
Great, because I think Larry Fitzgerald is the starting caliber receiver, even if he's not as good as his contract. It'd be really fun to have a former Minnesota Viking ball boy play out the Minnesota Vikings, the Academy of Holy Angels, man. Which, screw the Academy of Holy Angels, but he lived in Minnesota. That's really great.
No, that would be all right.
Yeah, but in terms of like the football aspect of it, I don't think he's worth whatever contract he ended up committing. He obviously would not get the contract he has with Arizona if he somehow ended up in Minnesota. He's not going to be a $23 million cap hit in Minnesota, which that's what he is in Arizona, which is why they want to get rid of him maybe.
Well, and what's Adrian Peterson's cap hit, like 18 or 19 or something?
Adrian's is 15, but I think he can get
15?
to 17 at the end of his career. I think it maxes out at 17, but it's like 15 now.
So we trade Adrian Peterson to Dallas for like a cash award, and like they get Adrian Peterson and like 2 bottles of Johnny Walker Gold Label
Not
or
the
whatever
NBA.
it is.
You cannot trade Johnny
All
Walker
right.
Gold. It's not the NBA.
All right, never
Oh,
mind.
wait, no, hold on. Why not trade Adrian Peterson to the Cardinals? They need a running back, and they don't have a quarterback.
Well, there you go. Then we just need to find what, $7 million or so worth of value.
Well, so the Cardinals absorb $14.4 million of his $23.6 million if they trade Larry.
So if they trade Larry for Adrian, then they might be able to convince themselves that they're not getting a really terrible deal by eating that $14 million.
Well, no matter what happens, they eat the $14 million. So would they rather have? So the question is actually, would they rather have Larry for $9.2 million or Adrian Peterson for $13 million?
Yeah.
Actually, that might still be an argument for Larry. Yeah, I don't know.
That's the $4 million is a lot of money.
Yeah, it is a lot of money. But again, receiver is not as important as running backs. I think I might be the only one who thinks that. But yeah.
Well, no, I would say one individual running back is by and large more important than one individual receiver. I think a receiving core is valuable than a running back and fullback core in today's NFL.
I was about to. You were about to go to that next step with your language, obviously. Anyway, I agree with you. Yes.
Yeah. Let's see. Khan writes us Vikings, and Jonathan Judich writes, "This is a good question. I second it."
Yes.
Vikings.
Vikings
is my answer.
Yep.
Steve Johnson at st_Vike writes us, "Will Teddy be better than Luck in 5 years?"
No. He'll be the third best quarterback in the NFL. Fine. It'll be Luck, Russell Wilson. No, it'll be Russell Wilson, Andrew Luck, Teddy Bridgewater.
Was Luck a number 1 draft pick?
Number 1 overall.
I will say that Teddy's career average or career performance
will exceed his pick more than Andrew Luck's career performance.
Exactly. I mean that's probably guaranteed to be true given that Luck was picked number 1. But I would say that there will be a bigger gap between Teddy's expected career performance compared to his draft pick and his actual career performance compared to his draft pick in the positive direction. Like I think Teddy will be much better or more betterer than his draft pick suggests than Andrew Luck. It is, and even if Andrew Luck is like slightly worse than number 1. Better quarterback, it's going to be really, really tough to throw as many touchdowns as freaking Andrew Luck did. Like, the second part of the question, do you think this will be the new Brady versus Manning? No.
Nah, it's going to be Russell Wilson versus Andrew Luck because Wilson's going to get all the rings, but Luck's going to get all the exactly. I think Wilson's also a better quarterback, but everyone's like, well, he doesn't have to carry the offense or whatever.
No, he just has to score twice in 5 minutes.
Right.
And then make Tom Brady do it, and Tom Brady's like, sure, okay. Whatever you need.
Yes, sir. Wait, you want me to restructure the contract so that you can cut me easier again? Okay.
Ugh.
Damn it, Tom.
I know. But no, it will not be the new Brady versus Manning. I think you're right. I think Russell Wilson is going to be the new Tom Brady, and Andrew Luck will be the new Peyton Manning, and the comparisons will be eerie for many years.
Yes, although I prefer Peyton Manning in the debate and Russell Wilson in the debate. So look at me, I'm double dipping.
Wow.
Hashtag rings.
Hashtag hot take. Finally, rounding out our mailbag this week, Judd Zolgaz Hoodie at JZ Hoodie writes us, "Who would have a longer beard? Arif after not shaving for a week, or Dusty after not shaving for a year?"
Oh, me for a week, easily.
Yeah, if we were going just by like if you were to shave all the hairs and then measure them individually end to end, you would like lap me multiple times after 1 week. However, if I did not shave for a year and you did not shave for a week, then and I am liberally using air quotes here, beard would be way longer and nastier than yours.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean.
Like,
Yeah.
it would be like 9. It'd be like you've seen what happens when a guy that can't grow a beard still tries. It would be those 9 scraggly hairs that are like a mile long sticking out of my chin, like dipping into other people's soup. Like,
Sorry, that's my individual beard there. I got
these are my. This isn't even really a beard. These are just my 7 hairs
got that
of the apocalypse.
I've been meaning to shave.
No, I am comfortable with remaining forever beardless, I guess. I can't even imagine what a mountain man you must look like after a week, but I know for a fact that you would win that contest effortlessly.
All right, next question. Or is it, you said that was the last question?
That was it. Yeah, that's
oh, man, we have to do a wildly irresponsible prognostication without knowing anything about the combine. Oh, God.
I have nothing prepared. Let's wait until we have some actual data to work with.
What? Wait, no. Let's just take a stab at whether or not a combine record's going to be broken. Fastest 3-cone, fastest short shuttle, most reps on the bench, fastest 40. Do you think a record's going to be broken at the combine? Whatever you pick, I'll take the other side.
All right, I'll take the crazy money then. I'll say yes.
Okay, so you think it's going to be broken. I think it won't be broken, but if it is broken, it will be in...
or which category?
Yeah, right. So I think it won't be broken, but if it is broken, the category I'm picking is... I don't think it's going to be the 40. I don't think you've got a Dree Archer type or a Chris Johnson type. Broad jump. Yeah, I think it'll be broad jump. I don't know what the record in broad jump is. I'll look it up. It's like 11'11" or something insane. I am apparently predicting a 140-inch or longer broad jump.
Well, good luck with that. That strikes me as wildly irresponsible.
For comparison, so Jamie Collins, first place, 11'7". For comparison, second place is tied the 2 players who have 3 fewer inches on the broad jump. 3. It's not even close, relatively speaking.
Wow. So 11'5" is apparently the threshold to beat.
So the 2 players ranked 2 and 1 player ranked 4. Out of those 3 players, 2 of them have been mentioned on this podcast already, and 1 of them played for the Vikings recently. Can you guess?
Ben Tate?
Nope. Although that was a really good guess, actually.
Randy Moss?
No, because this only goes back to 2006. I'm at the NFL.
Oh, shoot. Oh, okay. Yeah. I don't know.
Oh, you guys are so close to Randy. Justin Hunter.
Damn it.
Justin Hunter. You're right. It was like Randy Moss.
I was about to say it. Too. So, I just gave up.
Justin Hunter is one of the folks tied for second. The other one I'll mention in a little bit. And then ranked 4th, Julio Jones.
Wow.
Yeah. Ranked 2nd, who is the most flashy athletic player not named Cordero Patterson who's recently played for the Vikings?
Percy Harvin?
Jerome Simpson.
Ah.
Yeah. It's the 2nd best broad jump since 2006.
Wow.
Yeah. There you go.
Well, there you go. Maybe there's a... probably not.
Yeah. There's a what?
I was going to see if you wanted to start, correlating things with broad jump specifically, but that can be an article for a different day.
Yeah.
What value is it if you're a really good jumper?
Yeah, evidently quite a bit. I don't know. Broad jump correlates well with stuff, so that's good.
So, well, you need pretty much completely strong legs and lots of explosive power in order to be able to broad jump well. So. That makes sense to me. I'd buy that for $1.
So it looks like since 2006, only 16 players have been able to broad jump 11 foot 1 inch or more. So that's 132 inches, man. Jesus. 139 for Jamie Collins. That's obscene. That is illegal, I've decided.
He should be arrested. That man has simply jumped too far.
Too many sharks. All right, so there you go. I predicted something obviously impossible, which is that the broad jump record would be broken. If a record is
irresponsible of you to prognosticate such a thing.
Yeah, there you go. But it's a hedge bet, so I'll win if nobody breaks any records.
Well, there you go. Do you have any parting shots? Anything beyond the combine work that you want to tease before we wrap it up for this week, since we have reached our appointed episode time?
Yeah, no like fact, or I am going to promote this thing because I basically promoted all the things I'm going to write in the next week and a half. But one opinion. I mean, can we just have like fun when we talk about the combine? I mean, you and I did, but like, there's just like not enough fun when we talk about. I mean, people call it the Underwear Olympics to make fun of it. Why isn't that awesome? We get to see the best college players in the country compete against each other in athletic events. That's awesome. Let's do. That's fun. Let's just have fun, man. Stop talking about how important it is.
And it's there's a different kind of aura about the combine. It's like people are competitive, but they're not in like game face, like rage competitive. Like they're competing, but you still see, smiles and laughter. It's a rare opportunity to see guys with their helmets off. It's a convivial atmosphere. And I agree with you. I think the discussions surrounding it should be, less nattering old man and more convivial, youthful exuberance. Like, why not?
Exactly. Be more exuberant.
Have fun. Isn't this game supposed to be fun?
It's a game, guys.
Wasn't this last year just a relentless PR and football disaster capped off with the worst possible thing happening in the last seconds of the Super Bowl?
What an awful year for football.
What a horrible year for football. Can't we all just go back and have fun? It's a new year, Let's enjoy ourselves out there, guys.
All right. That's my parting shot.
And an excellent one it is, I should say. You can find Arif and all of his up-to-the-minute, cool, lukewarm, and increasingly hot takes at Arif Hassan NFL. I am at Dusty O'Connell on Twitter. You can follow the show at NorseCodeDN. Don't have to wait for a bat signal to tweet us your questions. Just tweet them to us at any time during the week, and we will reserve them for our next episode of the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings, which you can find at NorseCodePodcast.com. If you feel like it, you can scroll on down to the little yellow PayPal donate button and flip us $5 for the privilege of podcasting for you every week, for coming up with new and heretofore untested statistical measures that seem to have strong significance and maybe even some predictive power. Only time will tell. And I'll take this moment to say thank you to everybody who has already contributed to the show. We are eternally grateful that we can run a show with no ads and no nonsense, and remain supported by you, our faithful listener, so that we can continue bringing content like this to your ear holes every week or 2 weeks, or whenever there's enough stuff for there to be words made about them. You will find us at Norse Code ready to talk for a couple hours into a microphone. Combine starts next week after?
Technically it started today, but the workouts don't start. It started the day of this recording, but the workouts don't start until not tomorrow, but the day after. So Thursday morning. So
through the weekend there will be stuff going on. So we'll probably reappear next week with
updates,
a little combine breakdown, some updates. We'll try to stay focused on the fun though. That's going to be the most important thing for us.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be. Well, look at this eye-popping thing, or look at this loser. Give me a lot of that.
Exactly, exactly. Until then, however, our formula remains: Christian Ponder sucks. What a rare miss from the great Rick Spielman, drafting Christian Ponder way too high.
What are you talking about? He misses all the time. I mean, look at where he drafted Christian Ponder.
That's fair.
Man, I still get that in my mentions.
You get a lot of things in your mentions, though. Yeah,
that's true.
You're very, very popular on the tweeter. At any rate, our formula is still that Christian Ponder sucks. and we will see you next week.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.